It's true.
And maybe spending time with this. I don't know.
Now you wanted to sit by Holly and I was thinking. And you don't really know. I am burning. Like, love in your life. Love in your life. Sounds a lot. What do you much for?
Yeah.
Literally.
I'm not the chair. I think, right.
Okay, I'll try, I'll start. Do you need anyone? Oh, I have.
Me and my dad.
Yeah, you're. Derek and he is the DDRS. Okay, yeah.
I can hear you.
And we might have one.
I remember when.
Derek, you should be able to unmute and talk. You wanna try it?
Yeah.
Can you say that again, Jessica?
There you go. Make sure we hear it.
I feel like.
Yeah, sorry.
Wait for Kelly for a second. We'll get started here in just a minute. Kelly's coming.
Oh, there you go. Yeah. Also, we think about like labor. There's a lot of acres for like. Definitely. It was funny because I told you. And you share. But it really. I don't know. Posted it. Thing on there. Yeah. No, you just did it. Yeah, right. Yeah, he's one of the. Yeah, so. Everybody I know. When they eat, and the number of hours I stuck like that. I mean, you just know when that was what.
She's on her way in a second. I want to wait for you to start. What was this video?
Yeah, it's something called I See Me, so it's talking about like people with disabilities and how they're seen.
Had you seen that?
I was looking for one and I saw it, and I was like, okay, I really like it.
I would post it. They're very wild.
Well, I was looking through open page one, there's some good ones there, but there's some of them are like more catered towards like negative.
It's more DSP. Yeah. No, I know, that's the problem, like sometimes I gotta kind of get one, right, or just to get one, yeah, not like DSP. For me, non-DSP. I think they're trying to do more, but. I mean, actually, looking for it.
It's just. All of
Kelly, you're the best. I meant to. Okay. All right, guys, we're gonna go ahead and get started. Sorry about that. We had the fire alarm and got us a little bit delayed here. So we're gonna go ahead and get started. As you guys know, our mantra here at DDRS, all people are empowered to live, love, work, learn, play, and pursue their dreams. Here's our agenda for today. We have a welcome video, introductions, and some housekeeping things. Christina Commons is on vacation this week for fall break, so Kelly Mitchell has gladly stepped in to give us the BCVS update. Holly's gonna share some updates from Beads. Kyle is gonna talk about still aligning employment supports in VR, but he attended the Sound conference last week, Kyle, I think last week. And so he's going to give us just share some things that came out of the national the Sound conference. I'll share some APRA project updates, and then we will save some time at the end, some parking lot items, just so save if you have any things you want to talk about, save that for that last 15 minutes. We have Derek virtual and possibly Loretta joining us as well virtually. Oh yeah, just you, Derek. We're only seeing you, so you know.
Excellent.
No mean gestures up there. Okay, we are going to start off real quick. Noah found a really good video, and I think this is going to work. I embedded it, finally figured that out after about 2 years. You think I would have gotten that done sooner, but I'm just going to hit this, and we're going to watch it. And then Noah, I don't know if you want to tee it up or you just want us to.
So yeah, this is a video about people with disabilities and how they're seen and how they may see themselves.
So we'll see. Hopefully we don't have any ads here. We might have to watch I don't know, Goodyear tire ad or something, but hopefully it loads. We have Quinn here to for our tech. I know we need some elevator music or something here. It didn't take this long before. I know, and everyone's waiting on me. Yeah. All right. Okay. Might be a little bit of an ad. Let's see.
I'm going to take just 1 minute to explain why your contribution right now is so important. This may
start.
I feel so blessed to be able to just live my life and have people be motivated by it.
I have a spinal cord injury. And so when I was seeing people roll by, I was like, wow, so that's what I'm gonna look like.
I think I'll do a bit different. I think it's cancer and kids.
I was born paralyzed. I was born with spina bifida. So I've been paralyzed my whole life, and it's the only life I know. So I had to kind of grow into learning I was different.
My biggest insecurity is my legs. So I decided, hey, if that's my biggest insecurity, then I'm gonna start a gene line. And all of the pictures are based around my genes and my legs and other people's legs. And that's where I realized that it's okay to be different. Because once you embrace it, your entire world changes.
People need they don't know how to react to me a lot of times. So like, I make little jokes like, hey, calm down, it's okay. I'll be okay.
I would have people treat me as if I wasn't really there, and I would have people treat me like they didn't want anything to do with me. And perhaps it's because they were scared and they didn't know any other response.
One of my favorite things is when I'm out in public and I have all my girls with me who are all in chairs, who are all gorgeous. And we literally love when we see heads just turn.
Society doesn't correlate disability and being attractive. We are beautiful people. Everyone's beautiful in their own way, but we can be stylish. We can be gorgeous and stunning and fabulous, as I like to say, because yes, I see myself as being fabulous.
Being a dancer, you know, once a dancer, always a dancer, I didn't stop. So I would go out to the clubs and I would get my boogie on. And I was surprised by how guys would approach me and be like, hey, you're hot. And they wouldn't say you're still hot. they would say, "You're hot."
There is the black and white. There's the bad and there's the good. So as long as you're focusing on the good, then the bad just seems to melt away.
We're only given one life, and you got to be proud of it.
You want to bust a couple of moves? What? Oh.
Perfect. Let's get a cut.
Awesome. I love that. Thank you. That was a good one. Awesome. Anyone? That was a happy one. Not that they're not all happy.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm gonna turn it over to Sean, I shared this via email yesterday. It's yesterday. He is on the board, correct? Sean, you tell a little bit about it as this is loading and what you're sharing. And I sent it around to everyone via email.
Okay, so I'm on the National Council of Self-Advocates, and we have been working on a toolkit for Congress. And so, when we were working on it, it was gonna be like 30 pages long. And so we were working on it, and I had a paper in front of me that had a QR code, and I was like, hey, why don't we have QR code to make it not so big, and so if somebody wants to read something that is a lot of pages, that they can just click on the QR code. So there are 4 QR codes on the bottom of this. We wanted a 1-pager, and so.
Is that the bottom, Sean? Sorry.
Yeah, it's at the bottom.
Okay, sorry. There we go.
And so, Brittany Owens, I didn't know you could change the colors on those.
Oh, and
I thought
and not
it
be
was
black,
pretty
yeah.
cool that
That is
they
really cool.
changed it orange instead of black, so that's kind of cool.
That is cool.
It's
It's easier to
the
see,
little
like,
things that get me going, okay?
well, it's brighter, like you see it, you know what I mean? It's like-
Yeah.
Yes.
And it just happens to be a stupid QR code. Yeah, I mentioned the QR codes and everybody liked that, and so, it would have been like 30 pages if we would have kept it the way it was, and, we wanted something to, because people on the open meetings that we would have would come on and say, how do you get in touch with your legislator
Hold on.
and, all the people at the government? And so we did this, and so that's how this came about, is from our meetings that we were having, so. And you guys can share this with anybody you want, and.
Yeah, I'll send it it is in this, in the document. Also, when we post the slides and everything, these will be in the slides. So, yeah, thanks, Sean. That's awesome. Are you guys kind of wrapped? This is like official, right? Is there
Yeah, it's
anything-
official.
Okay, cool. What's up on the next slate? Is there other stuff you guys are working on?
Taking over the government.
What? Okay, well, I'm gonna shut you down.
What we're going to be working on next, we're focused on the national conference and our symposium,
When's that? I forgot, it's coming up.
a couple of weeks.
That's what I thought. Okay,
It's on November 2nd,
where is it? Is it somewhere fun or you guys?
Full.
Oh,
Columbus, Ohio.
oh.
Maybe I'll work on that.
Well, maybe.
Sean, I know you hate it, but I love fall and I could be one of you.
Well, maybe you guys can share at the next meeting in November, kind of about the conference and,
You'll miss the Taylor Swift concert.
oh yeah, there you go.
Oh, well.
Oh, well.
Well, thanks, Sean, for sharing this. I'll make sure everyone gets this again and pass it around. And I just realized we forgot to take roll call.
I haven't.
Oh, you were supposed to yell at me.
No one's already.
I know, no, you gotta yell at me.
Not.
I know, I'm sorry. You did. So we'll go do that. So I apologize for that. No, go ahead if you wanna.
Right. Sean Fulton,
Here.
Katie Stafford Cunningham,
Brandy Foreman for Katie Stafford Cunningham.
Karen Brummett,
Morning, Karen Brummett, representing Case Management, IPMG.
Kate Barrow,
Here.
Kim Dotson,
Here.
Ann Titus,
Here.
Kelly Hartman,
I'm here.
Melissa Keys,
Here.
Carrie Lee,
Here.
Derek Norn,
I'm here.
Lisa Paddock, Loretta Springer, Kim Han,
Here.
Kelly Mitchell,
Good morning.
Kathy Robinson,
Here. Morning.
Jessica Harlan York,
Here.
and Kyle Ingram. Here.
Awesome. Thanks, Noah. And Noah, did you say yourself?
Oh, yeah, I'll no, present yourself out to the end.
I just kidding. Thanks, Noah. Sorry about that. I'm gonna turn it over to Kelly just to share some updates of the council membership.
Are we going to be christening or?
Go ahead. You want to just celebrate folks who are rolling off?
all right.
Is that okay?
Sorry.
No, you're
Wasn't
fine.
paying attention.
Sorry.
Does it feel like Monday?
I know.
Yeah. Anyway, today we wanted to recognize some upcoming transitions and celebrate a few of our current advisory council members as we plan and continue our transition. So at the close of this calendar year, both Kelly Hartman and Karen Brummett will be ending their current terms. Both of you have served for quite some time on the council, and I and many others look at you and you are pioneers in our field, in our industry, and the level of dedication and commitment that you have demonstrated through your actions has been unwavering. Your contributions have been priceless, and you will be greatly missed at this table. So I just want to take this moment to recognize you and thank you both for your many years of service on this council, but also to the industry. So I, just as a level set, the terms typically on the advisory council are 2-year terms. When I joined the state now a little over 3 years ago, it was one of the charges presented to me as then the associate director to really work on council alignment, being more attentive to the details of the council, a matrix, if you will. And so we began that work kind of looking at who was seated at the table and how might we continue to embrace and expand the input that we receive as part of this council. And then obviously things transitioned as I assumed the position of director and Jessica stepped into that role. And then midstream, we had some minor changes in legislation that also then dictated how appointments were made, and those terms. And subsequently, we did some work on bylaws. So all of this to say is it's kind of, it's been an iterative process, if you will, over the past 3 years. We will sometime in November, December, announce new appointees then to the advisory council. We are currently in the process of reaching out to prospective members, and once confirmed, then that will be made public. I think one other piece is we want to note, and I'm getting a little bit of feedback there, my apologies, is that we have a seat for an individual that will be open. Megan has, I think, decided that she would like to transition to pursue some of her other passions.
I know, I wish she was here. We did.
I know, so, and I wish she were online with us or here. So I also, Megan, has been integral also in the development of this council and being a voice for individuals with disabilities, individuals with lived experience. And she's done that very eloquently. She's traveled great distances to participate. She's been the first person to show up at the State House. She was one of the first persons that made me feel welcome in this new role. And she always made sure to reach out and share not only her story, but her perspectives on relevant issues. So again, thanks to Megan. Yeah. And I will also reach out to her personally, but I wanted to do that in a very public way and acknowledge her contributions. And Jessica, you may want to speak to this. Our thought is at this time is that we will open that seat up for applications. And so we will vet and put forth an application process for individuals with lived experience, individuals with disabilities to have a seat at this table. So Jessica, do you want to speak any more to that?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, we're developing that right now. Again, nothing too outrageous or anything. We'll create it and then open it up, probably send it out publicly as well as through the channels, ARC and all of our partners, et cetera. And then the goal would be that my goal is to have it done soon. I don't think I've got a little bit of a draft, but and then we would want to fill it at January 1st, I think would be the goal. And so in December would most likely Kelly and I or whoever, talk to candidates. And yeah, we thought that was kind of a different way, and get some perspective from just a wide
So you
variety of.
engage the reaction of the council.
Yeah, I guess
to that
your thoughts too on that. I don't know.
Because it is an appointment. But particularly of late, I think, and I've been very pleased to see that the level of interest in the council and the issues that are at hand. And so wanting to open that up. So again, what are your thoughts?
I have a question. So obviously, under the umbrella of DDRS, you have lots of different service delivery systems. Would you prefer that it be someone who's in a particular program or just someone who's had lived experience in general?
I'm going to put this forth to the group because I think we've acknowledged this issue. Currently, if you look at the legislation and the makeup, you are really looking at an individual with an intellectual or developmental disability.
And that's that's what.
So that is, my understanding is what we would need to see at the present time. Going forward, it is a matter that this council will need to address as now the division has assumed authority for 2 new service populations, and that's expanded beyond those with intellectual and developmental disabilities. But
it could be someone, for example, that has an intellectual or developmental disability who's only participated in VR and not other service delivery systems.
Yeah, it just says the statute, and I don't have it pulled up, but we talked, it's just.
it's
very broad.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep. And I'll put that in the application. It'll probably be a form or something that, you can go in online, but, and again, it's gonna be, I'm not trying to overcomplicate this by any means, but I'll put in there sort of, that it's a 2-year, this is appointed by Kelly, and I was gonna just not to correct you, but the 2 years is for folks that Kelly appoints. 2-year terms don't apply to, the entities that are appointing. I just want to make that clear. Sorry, just so it's, clear that those are not 2 years, but anyway, but yeah, it'd be a 2 years. And I'll kind of put just maybe to giving folks a thought, it tends to be, I don't know how many meetings are in person. I'm trying to think, I can't remember, but, and I'll probably do a link to the bylaws, just make sure folks, as they're reading it, have an idea of the time commitment. And obviously if we're interviewing people, we can ask them. So yeah, I would encourage anyone, as long as it's I think anyone who wants to apply,
The council has an application process similar to that, and I'm happy to share.
That'd be great.
Because it's already written.
Awesome. Yeah. I don't want to do.
Don't
reinvent
the wheel. Yeah. We also have an interview process where our council members, the leadership committee actually takes an active role in interviewing potential candidates, and kind of discussing that themselves. I know that's a little different. There was something else I was going to share.
No, that would be great if you can just email me.
Yeah. Plain language, making sure that and the bylaws too. A lot of times bylaws, if they're not in plain language or easy to read, that might be a barrier. That was the only thing I was going to add.
Yep.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Anyone else? Any thoughts or anything? I think that was that it? I'm trying to remember.
I believe that's
okay. Yeah, I think so. Those were what was in my notes. All right, so stay tuned. That will be, my goal is I'm hoping to release it like middle of November and give folks, a month or so. I don't think, hopefully it'll take us too long, but
we have a lot of interest.
And we'll do the meetings virtually with folks, so people aren't gonna have to travel here for an interview or anything, so. Okay, Let's see, moving along. Sorry, I'm trying to look at this in my notes here. Derek, sorry, just maybe if you, I'll try to see if you raise your hand, but feel free to interrupt me or something if you have to say anything in case I don't see you. Okay, so turning over to, as I mentioned, Christina's enjoying some much deserved time off. I think college visits maybe with her son. So, and so I will turn it over to Kelly. She knows the slides, but if you, any specific questions, we might have to direct to Christina, just FYI, in case she's unable to answer.
All right, well, I certainly am not Christina, and I won't do the job that Christina would do. But I will certainly try to cover it thoroughly. So if you would, just go ahead and advance. I think most significant, and we've been discussing this, is the fact that our Bureau of Child Development Services, or First Steps, did make it through the Office of Special Education Program, or OSEP's on-site interview process as part of federal monitoring. Christina wanted me to, and I also would like to acknowledge the contributions and the hard work of the First Steps team, particularly David for his leadership it related to the monitoring preparation. He was extremely organized in his approach, and therefore the team was extremely prepared for all of the interviews and meetings that were part of that on-site visit. We'd also like to recognize Maggie, who, as Christina puts it, and I'm going to read her words, was steady in her demonstrations of the data system and outline of how we monitor for compliance and results. And Connie, for her great ability to tie our recruitment and training efforts into everything that we do, and the significance of training and family engagement. We also want to thank a lot of our partners who also were part of the process and participated in interviews. Our ICC, the council members, many of them were interviewed, InSource, numerous families, team members from our system points of entry, and some of our provider agencies. So it was quite an undertaking across the state. I also was engaged in this process, and I can tell you at the conclusion of each day, the team members from OSEP would provide our team with feedback. We kicked off the monitoring in February of this year, and I like the way that Christina put this. Now I'm reading her note. She indicates that she respectfully requested that OSEP treat our monitoring engagement just like an IFSP. And I remember our conversations around this, just like the individualized family service plan that we utilize with the infants and toddlers and their families that we support. So for those of you who might not be as intimate, if you will, with the IFSP process, we start by asking families, what are their child's strengths? Before we ask about the concerns. And then we focus on those strengths and we celebrate the strengths of not only the child, but the family as well. And we build a plan that centers on the strengths while also building new skills and addressing the concerns that the families put forward. And I thought this was such a neat approach. For those of you that don't know, early in my career, I did do case management, and I used to do case management for First Steps when it looked a little bit differently when we first launched back in the early 90s. And the IFSP process was one of my favorite things. It led the way for what we now refer to as life course or person-centeredness or PATH. And it really was a trailblazer, if you will, in the industry. So Christina and her team related to OSEP that we're very well aware that Indiana has tremendous strengths and that we intended to share those with them throughout the monitoring engagement. And she let them know that each day when there was a debriefing, they didn't want to hear just about what they could do better. They'd like to hear, what are we doing well? So I really appreciate that she took charge in that particular matter. So I'm very pleased to share, and I think I've shared this previously, that they did indeed honor that request. It was an incredible experience. I was with them for a few of those days. Each day, when they debriefed with those, there was feedback around what they had heard, were our relevant strengths for that particular topic. And then they provided our team with the concerns or where they thought we could strengthen the system. So just going to highlight, if you will, Jessica, a few of those strengths. Obviously, our staff's knowledge of fiscal requirements, they were extremely impressed with the diversity of funding strengths and how we braid and blend multiple funding streams to support what we do through First Steps. In fact, wanted to share that somewhat across the nation. They were rather impressed with the data collection and how we utilize the data to inform decision-making and our strategic planning. Obviously, the partnership and the relationships with our local communities, utilizing and leveraging technical assistance when it's available. I think they most appreciated the genuine transparency of the team. There was a lot of honesty around where our gaps exist, and we acknowledge the improvements that needed to be made. And I was pleased to see that with the team. I think it shows a team that's recognizes their strengths, but always know we can do better. And the only way that we do better is to be willing to pull back the layers. And just they acknowledged how well prepared the team was. I actually was in the meeting the day that they talked about that and how much that was reflected. If you would, Jessica. Yeah, I think you're on it. Sorry, I'm trying to
That looks
advance
really
my
good.
own
It
little
looks the same.
set.
I'm following on here.
So I'm not following her notes. I'm doing my own Kelly Mitchell thing now. So. So obviously there were some areas that offered opportunities for us to improve. And that would be training or increased awareness and understanding around cost participation, family cost participation. That you know, Kate, you were just making the point. Just being very clear, using lay terms and when we're communicating broadly. So just taking another look, see if you will, at our procedures and manuals to ensure that they're comprehensive, that they're clear, that they can be clearly understood. They wanted us to expand what it is we are monitoring. And that was inclusive of agencies themselves and independent providers. So they wanted a little bit enhanced, if you will, monitoring. That we do need to issue annual determinations regarding our local programs and providers. And then we need to make some updates in our procedural safeguards and our dispute resolution processes. So overall, it was a pretty exhausting experience. Really, they've been at it since February. The team put a lot of hours in it, but it was consultative in nature, very informative. So with that, and taking that information, we've established our 25 priorities for the Bureau. And you can see those listed on the screen before you. We want to catalog comprehensively all of our First Steps policies, really look at that family cost participation policy, making it clear, formalizing it, looking at the procedure, and then how do we better inform and train families on the process?
What does that mean? Family cost participation? I don't know.
Families do under, in Indiana, they are required, it's based on their income, to possibly have a match or a contribution for their First Step services.
Like a copay. Is that new?
No. Now, it was put on pause during COVID. But no, that's been.
I thought it was the First Steps in the late 90s, and I don't remember.
That
wasn't in place. It wasn't in place then.
It wasn't in place in the 90s, but it's been in place. So I misspoke. I shouldn't have said since inception, but it's been in place for quite some time.
Mid-2000s.
Yeah, 20
About 20.
20 years,
Yeah.
15, 20 years.
Oh,
Yeah, Kim had wanted to say something.
yeah, the only thing I was gonna add is, what I really appreciated about Christina explaining this at the ICC meeting is, it's not just talking about the sliding fee scale and how it works, but there's also a process that if family has financial hardship, that there's a process that they can apply for to get that waived.
Yes.
And a lot of families don't know that and think that it's too cumbersome, so walking them through that and making that a little bit easier, I think is a big help, so I appreciate that.
And I think too, just families understanding that it is a requirement. You obviously don't want to engage and then there could be complications down the road for lack of payment on, the family cost participation. So thank you for that note. I appreciate that.
How does Indiana compare to other states? I mean, that's not something you might be able to answer right now, but compared to like states, how do we kind of align, or do we have similar gaps in need? Where's the pluses? Does that
When
make
you're saying gaps in the what?
So when we're talking about some of the things that we could be working on, if you could go back
On all of the
on
things.
all of the, yeah.
Honestly, we went into this likely knowing what was going to be identified as opportunities or gaps. This is typical across the nation. Christine and I had a lot of conversations. In fact, we're in many areas in a much stronger place than other states. And is that a fair statement? I don't want to over-represent, but I will say from not only my purview, but my understanding and feedback from the team at OSEP, I think we place highly if you look across the nation. And actually, Christina shared some of that data in previous reports.
Yeah, and again, at the ICC meeting, that 5th bullet point was OSEP asking Indiana to be a national technical assistance and model for other states because we have such a strong program.
Yeah.
Wanted to give you guys credit. I think our program is great.
Yeah, they actually had asked on several pieces if we would serve as either TAA or role model as example for other states. So, and we'll have the formal Sarah and share that.
I have a question. So kind of in reflection to what she said, did we learn anything about our own division when they looked at gaps? Like, do you see that, for example, any of the gaps that it's not just in first steps, but we're like, oh yeah, that's probably something we need to work on across all of our mini silos. Does that make sense? So I look at, for example, I'll pick number 3 because that's the one I'm actually asking about.
Yeah.
Monitoring and including monitoring of agencies and independent providers and looking at things annually. Do we see like that's something you've identified as a gap just within first steps, or is there implications that are system-wide within DDRS?
Well, I mean, again, I'm just speaking informally, we look across the division as a whole, and I would say it's odd that you would refer to 3. That would be the one that I would likely say I think has implications across the whole. I think when you're looking at home and community-based services, when you look at honoring choice and individual rights and using private providers, monitoring can always be a challenge. It's like, where's the line? Well, you don't want to be too restrictive, but you want to be certain to have enough oversight. So I think across the whole, that is something that we've been exploring, and we've talked about that.
Yeah,
You're chomping at the bit to say something. Right?
I just want to use the microphone. No, I think it's for us 2 and 3 go together. They're hand in hand. So like if we're gonna strengthen our monitoring, our policies and procedures need to be more comprehensive and more clear. And I think we've identified those 2 things as divisional, kind of not just specific to Part C or first steps.
And I would add to that, that is part of the reason, Kyle, that position was created as the director of policy and strategic initiatives, really having to focus on that policy procedure piece. You're going to note one of the things that when I first joined that we began to talk about is you see things listed as DDRS policy. And yet they're honestly beats policies. So how do we distinguish? We have bureau policies, but we also would have division-wide policies. So the work on that has already begun. Polly and her team have been charged. In fact, she's just onboarded a new position that will be focused on policy and training. So Kelly, it's almost as if we planted you and we did not, but it's a perfect question. So yes, indeed. Can you go back now to the?
I think we were.
Yeah, we were just
We're
talking
here.
about.
We are, did you finish?
Go back.
I think we were here.
I did want to just to Kathy, you were referencing. I think just looking across the board at all our policies and procedures, but specifically, we do know that we need to focus on revising our procedural safeguards and dispute resolution policies. Looking at a web page for the public, a lot of this is about easier access and not just access on a website, but that it's more understandable, that it's simplified. It's difficult to find things. Hopefully, our plan is you're going to see a lot of changes in the coming months and over the next year on our web pages and our communication as we work to simplify, make navigation easier. We're oftentimes a little too wordy, too technical. How are we more specific? Using spaces, using bullets, using lay terms, getting rid of acronyms that we're all guilty of using, myself included. So we have a huge focus on that. So know that that's not just within this bureau, but across the division. We can go to the next. And then also training and outreach. So the team has been working with our partners at IU. We're working on some onboarding modules for new team members and collaborating also with the Early Childhood Center on designing and developing tiered technical assistance. We're also going to look at continued training around family coaching. There was something I wanted to highlight there, and I know, go ahead. I just want to see, there was something I made myself a note. You can go ahead and move forward. So also, some of the pieces that we're looking at and our priorities are around quality assurance. We are looking at EI Hub. We're pretty deep in trying to move to the next iterations for the EI Hub. Working with our vendor partner there. I think you'll begin to see some movement over that in that area over the next 6 to 9 months. EI Hub is the data system.
Okay.
It's I call it the case management or consumer services software. So the system pointed ended, the service coordinators can access it, somewhat like the Beats portal or CAMS on the other side. That's the thought process. And that's where obviously we pull a lot of our data to and use that in monitoring. So again, you can see a lot of that's tied to data system validation, guidance and training. How do we further develop our queries for data, and how do we analyze and use that data in a more productive and effective way? A big piece of this is looking at the procedures around how to monitor the providers and services. We have a large network. And you know, that is one of the things as we were looking at it, and even our pre-work, we know that there's room for improvement there. Also, there's currently, I think the RFP is closed, and I know it's in process, so I can't speak too much to that, but the first steps sought a program evaluation vendor, so kind of expanding the role of that to assist in executing policies and procedures around the monitoring practices. So that's a piece of that as well. So there was some foresight, if you will, even pre on-site monitoring. Okay. Next slide, preparation, as we, look toward the findings, quality review manual updates, training development for families, and then updating prior written notice forms and training service coordinators. So a lot of work around those pieces. Next slide. I think that's kind of self-explanatory. So we wanted to highlight some of the successes that we talked about, the things that we're most proud of. Some of the successes that were a result of our increased state investment in First Steps. The 23 rate increase positively influenced the number of early intervention professionals enrolled. The rate increase led to significantly fewer children and families waiting for IFSP. Due to provider shortages, we had started to see an issue with being able, having the capacity to support individuals, families seeking those services. We also were able to increase the allocation for the system point of entry, the case management service coordination piece. And that combined with an intense focus on state and local recruitment and retention have led to significant decreases in service coordinator turnover across the state. So next slide. Trying to move through.
No.
And you can see the data here, state fiscal year 24 as compared to state fiscal year 23. So this is full year data. And you can see the growth in service coordinator and provider enrollment. Over 200 additional providers and service coordinators. You want to go to the next slide, please? But I think most significantly, and Christina's highlighted this in previous meetings, is not just the number. We talk a lot about this internally. Capacity is a lot of things. Capacity is the availability of a person to do something, or availability of a service. It's also the skill set, the capacity, but it's also not just a body. How available is that body? So if I have 10 providers in a system, but each of them can only do 2 hours per week, I can obviously provide only 20 hours of service versus 10 providers that each can contribute 40 hours per week. And I now can offer 400 hours of service. So I think it's relevant, and this is part of that, looking at what are the metrics that we're analyzing. How are we gauging our performance? So it's only as good as what we're reviewing, and are we looking at the right things? So really pleased to see that significant growth, again, year over year. These are full year comparatives, about 100,000 plus additional hours in 24 as compared to 23 in the First Step system. Next slide, please. I think what I have always been most in awe of and most proud of about the Bureau of Child Development Services, and I really give Christina a lot of credit in her leadership in this area, and Kathy too in her former name. But this is something that Christina has really led through with passion and vengeance, and that is how to diversify the funding stream so that we can support and serve more children and families in the state of Indiana. And this is one of the things that our federal team from OSEP were amazed to find. In fact, they wanted to really understand how we do this, because most states do not do this and do not leverage multiple funding sources to enhance, if you will, or expand the capacity to serve. So they've really focused on, number one, utilizing private insurance. That's one piece of that braid, if you will. Those efforts have increased recoupment by, I'm stressing that, 8.7 million since 2022. So in 2 years. So just a focus on that, and a lot of that was having the software system, the data to be able to do that. So over a 2-year period. Next slide, please. I think you can see the growth then, just broken down, starting at 6 million and then now, slightly over, 14 million in 24. Next slide, please. Oh, I thought she had one more. I would also say in addition to private insurance, First Steps leverages Medicaid and TANF dollars as well. In addition to our allotment through Part C, federal funding, and then state appropriation. That is how the Bureau of Child Development Services and First Steps have been able to expand the scope of what they do and our capacity to support. I think it's our last numbers, I don't have it right in front of me, about 25,000 children every year are supported through First Steps in service, and about 35,000 are evaluated and come through the system. Does that sound right? I know you hear that on a more. I think I might be off 1,000 or 2, but just to give you an idea, I think the last numbers I saw as far as annual, it's right around 25,000. So anyway, thank you. Good questions and great input. And anything that you want to add, as I said, you had a seat at the table as far as the.
Well, no, I was just a guest at that meeting. I think Christina's doing a fabulous job. That program has improved so much, and I love recruitment of private insurance.
Yeah.
It's such a mess, so long.
It really was, and it's been a game changer. And again, I will applaud the team. I think ensuring that families understand utilization of private insurance and potential impact. And so it's more than just, we're going to grab the dollars. It's really understanding how it can work and how it can support the goals of the family.
I would just add, I think when you're talking about the financial considerations, all the different resources that are being used, that First Steps is in Indiana still in a pay and chase model. And I think different than other states in that we're paying providers to deliver those services and then going and trying to recoup those dollars, which is helpful because it does ensure that providers are getting paid pretty quickly. But there's a lot of coordination and effort on the back end to get to those numbers that Kelly just highlighted. I don't think people understand.
Sure,
things
get mailed.
Yes, so it really is a huge lift on the team to make sure that that's really happening on.
And I'm going to applaud them again when we say the team. The First Steps team is a team when they are fully staffed of 9 individuals. So it is a small but mighty team. They do great things. Okay, that's it for me.
My turn. All right. You want to go to the next slide? Okay. Thanks, Kelly. Thanks, Jess. So just going to provide a few updates that on a few topics here. First, the waiting list update. So the monthly invitations for the family support waiver, as you probably saw in a recent announcement, has increased. We're inviting 200 people a month off of that wait list effective this month. That does not include those individuals who meet priority criteria. That's outside of that, or in addition to that 200. The monthly invitations for the health and wellness waiver are now, as of this month, increased to 500 per month. And then for the pathways, that has been increased to 1,200 per month, again, effective October. So just wanted to provide that update to make sure this group knows that we are inviting more people every month off of each of our wait lists. Next slide. And just FYI, if I talk fast, it's because Kyle's next to me on the agenda. So
Kyle just elbow her. No,
poor guy. He's always
Okay, all right. You have seen this slide before, but wanted just to, again, provide that context of kind of what we've done to get us to where we are in terms of the waiver activities or waiver amendments. Also, you will see the employment transformation, phase 1 represented there as well as the IPP implementation. What isn't captured there is the institutional modernization that has also been running alongside the work you see here for our waiver services. Next slide. Again, I know you all have seen this a gazillion times, but just to make sure we're level setting, this is where we are today in terms of HCBS within FSSA, not including Division of Mental Health and Addictions. Division of Aging continues the non-waiver services, Choice, Older Americans Act, Aging and Disability Resource Centers, and Adult Protective Services. Office of Medicaid Policy and Planning has the Pathways waiver. And then BEADS has the Health and Wellness, Traumatic Brain Injury, Community Integration and Rehabilitation, and Family Supports waivers. We continue to work with our kind of new to us providers in terms of helping them, us getting to know them and them getting to know us through those provider webinars, and also a lot of one-off kind of inquiries and communications. But certainly there's an identified need for us to continue to emphasize some of those very basic CMS requirements around choice and individual rights, and we continue to provide that technical assistance and guidance and support. Next slide.
FSS is fee for service is what you're.
Yeah, oh, yes, thank you. Fee for service, whereas, yes, thank you. That is correct. That is correct. What you will see is the 4 waivers overseen by BEADS are fee for service. The Pathways waiver is managed care. That's correct. Thank you for calling that out. There we go.
I've never seen
Using those acronyms. Oh, okay. Yeah.
Just want to confirm.
Yeah.
That's what I think.
No, good call out.
Hey, I got a question.
Sure.
And maybe it's off subject, but APS is under the Division of Aging. Is there talk it's gonna stay there?
I am not aware of any plans for that to change. I'm sorry.
APS under the Division of Aging.
As far as I know, it will remain there.
All right. Okay. This slide also we have seen before. I do want to note there have been some minor adjustments to the timeline that you will see demonstrated. Oh goodness, I didn't demonstrate it in the blocks, but in the text in the box. Those minor adjustments for the July 1st effective dates, those amendments, is related to giving CMS more time to review those. So they require 90 days, but we have learned it's better to give them more time to review those things, knowing that we'll be sending a couple renewals, 3 renewals and waiver amendments for waivers. So we just backed up that timeline a little bit to allow them more time to review those things. It does not change the length of time anything is out for public comment. Things will go out a little bit earlier for tribal and public comment, but the length of time it's out will stay the same. Next slide. So wanted to talk a little bit through some of the intended or proposed changes for the July 1 date and then for the November date. And I know these are things that I think we have talked about before, but I think that repetition and being able to talk through it is helpful. So bringing it up again, as we just mentioned, and it's demonstrated on the previous slide, the amendments or the package, what I call the waiver package, that we'll be submitting to CMS with an effective date of July 1st includes renewals of the family support waiver, the CIH waiver, and the associated B4. Just straight renewals, and that's because they're due for renewal. So those are planned. And then for the other waivers, the health and wellness, the TBI, the pathways waivers, there are some identified changes that we have, or some changes we have identified that will be included that again, we've talked about before. First, incorporating the level of care assessment representative, or LCAR. I think last month I mentioned that and got a couple looks like LCAR. So spelled it out this time. The level of care assessment representatives into the health and wellness and TBI waivers, and also impacting the pathways waiver. That LCAR is again a statewide vendor that will do the nursing facility level of care assessments for those waivers. They do that same vendor does the nursing facility level of care assessments for our pre-admission screening and resident review process today. So they are very experienced in Indiana with completing those assessments. So, and then additionally, new pediatric level of care assessment tools for implementation July 1. That includes the Peds or pediatric -HC, which is home care, and then the early years assessments. These will better assess the needs of youth that come in our door, and also support better service planning for them based on the needs as they're identified through that assessment. Any questions? I will add before we switch slides, there is also a lot of attention or focus around the IT systems that support our two waiver, or our two sets of waivers. I don't like saying it that way, but the FSW and CIH use the Feeds portal, which is a CMS certified system. And then the health and wellness and TBI utilize the CAMS, which is also a CMS certified system. So we are focusing on what we can do to get those waivers into one system as well. The good news is they're both certified systems. That's good. But we are listed positive. Yeah, there we go. CMS certified is important with systems. So, but anyway, we are hoping to make some changes there, hopefully by July 1st. So more to come on that.
So you're open for questions.
Sure.
Talking about level of care, I think that is something that people who are on the CIH Family Services waiver would love for that to be a conversation inside of those waivers too.
Okay.
There's just such a huge gamut of individuals inside of those waivers who all have to play by the same rules and the same criteria when maybe their level of care is considerably different. Is there any talk about bringing that kind of conversation to those waivers?
Yeah, so the level of care assessment tool that we use today in Indiana, we know is not the best. In fact, we have some additional steps that we have to take when we assess individuals for the intermediate, it's ICF ID level of care, which is intermediate care facility for individuals with intellectual or developmental disabilities. Yeah, that's why we use acronyms, right? It's just always, yeah. So the tool we use for that is not a great tool. It's not a great tool for youth. It wasn't designed for youth, yet we're using it for youth. So we are looking at how can we, what opportunities do we have as we're working with the Inter-I suite of tools for nursing facility level of care. Are there opportunities to utilize that suite of tools to assess individuals that for ICFID level of care? So I think you make a great point, you know, and I would agree with you completely. Yeah.
I just had a question, and this may be addressed later on in the PowerPoint. We had kind of talked about agencies that were offering both home and health services and HCBS, and how they're telling people that they have to use both services through them or not receive them altogether. Do you have any clarification on that?
So I appreciate you asking that, Noah. So I think I kind of alluded to it a little while ago about, you know, we're doing some work with providers that are new to us to make sure that we're clearly communicating and giving guidance around choice in HCBS, because that is a cornerstone of HCBS, right? Is ensuring that there is that choice. So certainly when specific examples come up, we can address those directly. But without those examples, we're trying to reach every provider about choice. So if there are specific examples, we would love to have those, because again, our role here is with our providers is really to help support them to provide their services and supports in a way that is compliant with CMS and that is person-centered. So if we have specific examples, we'll address those folks directly. Otherwise, we'll keep, you know, providing that education and guidance through our webinars and so on.
So Holly, if families are hearing that, who should they take that to? Should they take that to their case manager? Should they go to their Beach Regional office? What's the best?
They
avenue?
absolutely should talk to their care manager, but I would just also say that if that doesn't result in some action, they can reach out to us through the complaint line. Yep.
If I could too, I think because of where we're at in the transition process, at this time, I would appreciate if you would, through the beads line, just letting us know so that we can reach out to that provider to ensure that there's full understanding. I think sometimes what happens, and no offense to a care manager, case manager, that's not my intent, but we resolve this situation, you know, the one-off for the individual, but we may still have a broader issue within the organization. So if families are comfortable or through an advocacy organization, I think just acknowledging, making us aware of the fact that there may be a provider who's unaware, you know, of those requirements. So
A lot of them and I know, Noah, we've got a lot of that where it's like within that agency.
Yes.
That's their policy. We want to be the only home health and we want to use both of these. And so they will say, well, that's our internal policy. And it's like, well, that's not how it works.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times it has to be brought up the chain with the case manager or the care manager advocates for the individual, but when it's an overall policy.
But,
of the agency,
and the company has the right to have whatever policy they want. I mean, and I will clarify that. A private provider can say, we choose only to support people that select us for both A and B or what have you.
Why is that allowable?
They're a private business. They can conduct business how they like. They can choose to do that. You as a consumer have the right to say, I don't want to access that service. I want choice. Now, there are broader implications. We all know if there are limited availability providers, those types of situations. And that's where I think case managers, you're nodding vehemently, and other advocates can be of assistance, because if there's limited opportunity, then you get into, well, it's company policy, but it's also infringing upon an individual's right to choose. So it's,
I mean, that's always existed out there. That's
so you do have to navigate those on a one-off basis.
So
you don't have, we can't dictate the private business as far as their internal policy unless it's non-compliant. Yeah.
I mean, they have signed a provider agreement.
So
provide services.
Well, then we need to put it in the provider agreement that they have to allow for choice, because that's a rule.
that sounds like a HCBS violation.
They do allow for choice.
Choice within the choices they
If
give
it's private
people.
business, you have to work with it.
So, okay.
I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
There is, Melissa,
So-
you even nodding. As a private business, we can't control that aspect.
Are we providing education to families and individuals about the difference so that's very clear on the pick list that these are private providers, and if they choose from this list of private providers that they can say no to things like
Yeah,
what were
so-
the choices.
And this happens across, so just to be clear, this happens in the, as all the waivers. This is not unique to.
No, I know.
So I just want to make sure, and we do as part of this pick list.
It happens in.
Or the choice
So
list.
it
people-
is-
Sorry.
So then are you seeing an increase in providers moving towards private operations rather than accepting state funds so that they can?
No, I'm
No,
talking,
okay.
they're a private
Yeah.
entity. They're a private for-profit or a private
What they're saying
nonprofit.
is, I think an
Yeah,
entity
okay.
is an entity and it's not their business.
The
Right.
state
How they run
doesn't
the
own
No,
it.
no, no, I know that. I'm trying to understand if you're seeing a movement in that direction so that it
But
just
we're
seems like that's.
Like, I'm a private
slippery
entity.
slope.
It's like private, entities. I mean, like, and, I mean, my doctor could say, I don't wanna, my doctor is my doctor, I'm not a Medicaid patient, can make those choices.
And the choice comes back to.
Like, you can't discriminate, obviously, but I mean, discrimination is a different.
Right,
We're not
and that's what I
saying-
mean, there's always, you have to look at each situation because there are rights in private business, there's obviously rights of the individual, then you have to look at, are there mitigating factor, there's just.
I'm just wondering if this is contributing to service gaps for individuals because of, well, this is the only entity in my area that provides this and I have to choose both services if I want both services and there's no other option.
So if I can jump in, I think this is to Kelly's point, we want to know when that's happening,
Yes.
right? We want case managers, families, care managers to let us know. I think it's very important though that the family also talk with their care manager or
Yes.
case manager so that they can talk about their options. If this is that me making?
No,
it
it's
feedback?
all the mics.
If that is, if that is that business's decision. But I also want to say, we do reach out to those providers
Yeah,
and
that's-
say,
Yes.
let's talk through this.
And
because
understand the implications.
there is an important piece of HCBS or waiver services, and that is individual's choice. So can we talk, let's talk through this and see what decisions you're making and why.
Yeah.
And sometimes those providers will be like, oh,
Didn't think
okay,
about it.
didn't quite understand it, right? So that's why it's so important when case managers, care managers, families encounter that they reach out to us.
Yeah.
So that we can have those conversations, because it may be that it's a provider that's,
Yeah.
been doing HCBS for a long time, but they've had leadership changes.
Yep.
And something just didn't get adequately
Communicated.
communicated. So we're happy to talk with providers in those situations.
Yeah, I think it'd be helpful too to have some transparency in here, like how often is this happening? And do the providers then go back to the family and follow up and say, hey, we wanna correct something that we said earlier and kind of reevaluate that situation so that they're ensuring good services and good provision of services. Is there a way to be transparent about that?
So, I don't know that
Yeah.
because we're dependent on
Yeah.
somebody telling us, right?
Right.
Providers aren't gonna self-disclose that. But again, I can't speak enough about the importance of the care manager or case manager in those situations.
Right. It's
Supporting
extremely
those
important.
individuals and families and helping them make choices, and then we can deal with provider issues and that sort of thing.
Well,
It's-
that's a navigation issue that.
Yep,
here we
that
are.
is it.
Yes. This, we gotta know, choose this provider, they're gonna want everything in-house, and so.
Oh, they
here we-
do.
And they do, it's an economics issue.
Right,
And
you
a
know.
staffing issue, but however, I think what we have found is when we reached out to the state team and said, this is an issue with this provider, the only provider in town, and they're saying this, we've gotten a lot of support from the state that stepped in and said, well, look, because it's a bigger issue, right?
Well, there can be like coercion, I mean,
Yeah.
like stuff like that.
And I
It's
think,
not.
yeah.
It's hard.
And that's why I stress it's important for us to know as well, because Holly, to your point, we do find a lot of times. It may be just lack of information or lack of awareness, and working with a provider if there's been a change in leadership, but to your point, we do have to acknowledge it is a matter of economics. They are in business. And so
Thanks, Sean.
there's a balance to it. There's a balance.
I have a dotted line question.
Hey, real quick, hold on, Kelly. Derek, do you have a question or do you come off mute?
Yeah, I think it's probably been stated, but I do think, I think having a better idea, if we're just waiting for, providers aren't gonna necessarily disclose, I don't think, you don't disclose anything until you realize that there's an issue. So I think my biggest concern is, it's a pretty big state. And there are a lot of places where there isn't the competition, it was stated, somebody can just, go to a different provider, but I don't think that's an accurate depiction of what the options are for many people. And I'm glad to hear that there's some strategy to kind of work with providers. I would just, kind of reiterate, I think it was Kate's point of that it's great that the state's doing that. And I think it's really important. But I don't think there's any idea or understanding of the scope of how frequently this is happening and really what recourse an individual has in a community that's serviced by one provider, and that provider chooses to restrict the choice options that person has. So it would be good to just have a little more context and contours around what this is, how big it is that we know of, but also what, kind of policy wise, strategy wise, communication, what is the protocol when this stuff comes up and somebody's hanging out there not able to get the services they want. So anyway, I just want to reiterate those points. Thanks.
Yeah, I think this is an issue across the board with health services in the United States.
Yes,
I mean, I don't
right.
think it's unfortunate, and I'm just saying, there are a lot of people on private health insurance who live in the middle of nowhere and can't get a doctor, unfortunately. So yeah, I think it's a
broader issue.
Unfortunately, but yeah, because people on our pick list, and that's another conversation.
But are these folks getting public dollars? And by that, I mean, are the individuals who are receiving services, or are they private pay? I mean, I think there's two different, the
problem is, Derek, just because looking at a map of Medicaid providers, if I'm listed as a Medicaid provider, but what if I'm not taking new patients or something? So looking at just a map doesn't help because if I see John Smith as doctor in this small town, he's listed as a Medicaid provider, he's active. But if I call, and I say, I want to come see you, and he's like, I'm not, or you're going to have a 3-month wait. So it's hard to know because they're a Medicaid provider doesn't necessarily mean they're accepting new patients or,
Right. So I think then the question, I think it's a big one for this group, and maybe I think that this group is curious about or really concerned about is, so then what? And I think by that, I don't mean about that doctor. I mean about the provision of services in the state. How do we build the capacity so that we're not reliant on that one provider in that community? And I don't know if we have a good strategy in the state to make sure that we're building that capacity, or we're just going to wash our hands of that and say, well, that's what it is. Wait till that person's done. And I'm not okay with that. That doesn't feel.
And I appreciate what you're saying. I think we've said that we recognize this as an issue. I would look to you all to inform us how you feel we should be measuring this issue.
Yeah.
I would greatly appreciate input on this because, as you all can tell, it is a difficult issue for us to wrangle, and we are not going to be able to get a finite number of providers or instances or incidents where this is occurring. So we're going to have to use probably a combination of information to get a good close estimate as to what size and scope this issue is. So I'm not going to say that we have the answer to that. I am going to look to this group since it is seemingly a high priority, and I would agree it should be, where and how we would be measuring this to tell us the size and scope of the problem, and also ways in which you all feel we could be intervening at different points in the system to help educate, train, provide technical assistance. We're doing some of those things now, but if they're not as effective or to the degree or extent that you all would like to see, we would appreciate recommendations or thoughts on what that might look like. So not saying that we have all the answers, because we definitely don't. We've tried a number of different, obviously, Holly and that team have tried a number of different strategies to try to attack this issue. We've even got some IT enhancements to tell us, and we can track referrals a little bit better than we've ever really been able to, but even that system doesn't capture the entire waiver world at this point. And so I would just say if there are other ways in which we can try to come at this issue, we would be open to feedback from people.
I might add to that too. I mean, on the feedback piece, and this has come up before this council previously, we use the word providers somewhat loosely. When you refer to provider, do you mean the therapist, the direct support professional, the direct service provider? Or do you mean the entity? And I do think that's a question that must be resolved when we think about choice. When we have smaller areas, I mean, let's just, if there are 10 people to be supported in a county, are you going to have 5 entities? Or do you want choice as far as who supports me on a personal basis? And as I think about the healthcare system, it's the same. There may be one large hospital. Am I interested in the variety of doctors and services, or is it, do I want 5 hospitals? And I don't have the answer to that, but I do think it's a piece that we intertwine those things a lot.
But I think what we want though, or what folks want is they want the hospital that's going to cure them of the issue, or they're, in this case, they want the provider that's going to get them a job, or they want, so I think it's, I don't think it's just, is it the person? I think it's the outcome in their life, be it better health or, assistance with a certain therapy, a specific therapy that would help them achieve a better life outcome, or a job in the community rather than the only segregated setting in that, the only provider providing segregated services. So, I mean, if we don't have choice, and I will say this, and I think this group is it's very important for this group to be able to provide that feedback, but I don't think we have the collective access to the individuals who are not getting services, to the service provision kind of network, and an understanding of where the services are provided. So I do feel like as much as I can provide that feedback, it's gonna, I think even collectively amongst this group, our hands are tied because we aren't the system cutting the checks for these providers, for these services that are being delivered, and we aren't the system that's connecting with folks. So, I mean, to me, I think throwing it back on us as the people who should be providing this information is a little bit of washing the hands, because to me, this is a question of the individual, that goes to the individuals we're talking about that are getting services. Are they getting what they want?
Derek, if you don't want to offer any, I'm not asking you to solve our problem. I was just asking for some recommendations and thoughts from people.
Well, I totally agree, but I think
I just would like to add that this issue, as we become more person-centered, will become more of an issue, because we're going to continue to have people look at all other services and supports before they look at waiver options. And so the ability for providers to do this is probably going to just evolve over time. I'm not saying that I'm supportive of that. I'm not, but I just think as we become more adept at being person-centered and using the waiver as the last resort when all other options are exhausted, you will see this become more challenging for providers to navigate. So I was not in any way suggesting that you all, we wash our hands and that you all solve a problem. I hope that the rest of the people in this room do not see that for what maybe it seems to be assumed here. That's not what I was saying. So would just appreciate feedback or thoughts as you all are an advisory council.
I have one.
Hey, guys, I'm gonna move this. Yeah, let's move this. I don't want to cut anyone off, but because I think we'll have time. I think we'll have time. So I don't want to cut people off, but yeah, that's the parking lot, point of the parking lot, right? Okay, so we will continue that. Because I know Kyle might not need too much time. He was going to, I know you told me you did it. We talked. I'm not cutting you off. Oh, Holly, I'm sorry, you do have a couple more. Do you wanna?
So,
I'm sorry.
gosh, one day they're gonna put me at the end so that when the time hits, you all will just get up and leave and I'll just. So, anyway, okay. Oh. I tried to have my coffee. So.
No, I don't know how to fix it. I'm sorry, Holly.
That's okay.
I can't hear you.
Yeah, we can go to the next slide.
This one? Okay.
Yeah, so I'm gonna run through these pretty quickly, but these are some proposed changes potentially for the set of amendments that will go in for an effective date of November. So there are some considerations on all of these, knowing that, again, this is for a November 1 effective date. So these are not all in stone, but some of the things that are potential. Some alignment of provider complaint protocol, which is different today under the Health and Wellness and TBI and FSW and CIH. MFP reserve capacity alignment, aligning some established service limits, especially around home modifications, community transition funds, specialized medical equipment, supplies. That's specifically calling out our rate changes that occurred in 2023 and our waivers. We're functionally using those new rates, but the waivers still have the old rates written in them. So that's just a technical correction that we're gonna do. Clarification on music therapy, direct and indirect time, modifying attendant care documentation requirements, revising a duplicate account, some potential changes to the CMS access rule for compliance reasons, and then level of care assessment tool alignment, again, as we talked briefly a short time ago about the Entri suite of tools and exploring opportunities there. Next slide. And Kyle probably would have talked some about this had he had any time. We've talked about addition of some services that support competitive integrated employment and that journey for individuals on the FSW and CIH waiver. One of the things that we are sure will be in the November 1st effective date will be a combination of home mod assessment and home mod or environmental mod. Currently, those are two distinct services. You may recall we just moved to that on some of the waivers for those two distinct services. And we will need to combine those at the direction of CMS. Expansion of self-direction, the implementation of the DSP training and registry, alignment of allowable items under specialized medical equipment supplies, some clarification of the respite definition, and some clarification on activities of attendant care and home and community assistance, which is what used to be referred to, or is still commonly referred to as homemaker service on the health and wellness and TBI waivers. Additionally, we have some potential revisions to integrated healthcare coordination, alignment of the structured family caregiving service. I feel like we've talked about that before because we've got two different models rolling right now. Revisions to the behavior support services in recognition of some of the work through the IPPs. Revision to adult day service provider categories. And then clarification around ownership of vehicle for vehicle modification. And this is just some language that's in the current waivers and aligning that with practice. All right, next slide. Gosh, so again, we've talked about this before, but I want to reiterate, once we get through those November amendments, right, our focus is really going to be on that waiver reset and creating that set of new cross disability waivers that will address individuals with different abilities with greater flexibility. So just want to mention that again and reinforce that we are not losing any of the feedback that we have received to date from way back in 2019 and everything we've learned through the waiver transition. And again, watch for more information on that and opportunities for feedback. coming out later this year and of course into the years following. Wanted to take a moment just to reiterate, next slide, please. Our money follows the person, or MFP, currently has a temporary pause on enrollment. It does not impact people receiving services through money follows the person. It doesn't prohibit individuals from transitioning out of nursing facilities or supervised group living or group homes. And it doesn't prohibit or limit access to the waiver services. This is just a pause in the MFP enrollment so that we can recalibrate, so to speak, our MFP program that has been running through health and wellness waiver and the CIH waiver. And I say running through, the MFP program is that first 365 days of service. And then individuals transition to either the health and wellness or the CIH waiver. So we're really looking at using this time during this temporary pause to evaluate our budget, our policies, our enrollment, our procedures across the board, recognizing that MFP will be utilized for individuals that will also, in today's state, transition to potential pathways waiver, health and wellness, and CIH. So we are streamlining that application and approval process, and we'll be working with our partners, the ADRCs and care managers and case managers around that.
Do you have an anticipated length of time of this pause?
Not yet. Not ready to give you that length of pause yet. Yes.
I can save this for the end of the meeting, but I know we're tight on time, so.
Okay.
Just a parking lot issue.
All right. And then lastly, just wanted to let this group, make sure this group is aware that OIG is now in state and have been doing visits to CIH locations. So
How's that going?
we don't have any formal report yet. So, you know, I think it's fair to say typically when OIG comes, they're gonna find some things.
Yeah, it's a routine.
It is.
Yeah, it's a routine audit. They're conducting those site visits to those that receive residential services on a community integration and habilitation waiver. It's distinctly focused on health and safety. They were gonna do 30 sites, I think, 30 site visits between October and December.
Right.
And we don't know the schedule.
Nope.
So
We don't. We literally get a text the night before. So we do have a state staff that is there as an observer with OIG in case they have questions about Indiana waiver. Because they work in all the different states and they have done this in multiple other states. It's on their website. Again, there was no reason they picked Indiana other than luck of the draw.
We came up on
They took a big slide.
Right.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's standard.
It's good they're not here about a complaint.
Right,
That's correct. And I'm sure there are things we will learn from this.
yeah, everything's an opportunity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's all right.
I think I would just, Holly, if you don't mind, I appreciated you kind of revisiting some of what's been presented previously. As we've said, we can't really communicate too much. We know that there are a lot of things going on and it's hard to keep grasp of it. I was asked recently, and I think it was even brought up during the last meeting, is, what happened to waiver redesign? We have not stopped in our efforts on waiver redesign and reset. There was, and it now seems like eons ago, a temporary pause during COVID. Obviously, I mean, it was, how do we keep the wheels on the bus? How do we keep people safe? So there was about a 2-year pause, if you will, just as things were starting to move forward. But we've been making iterative changes all along. And when Holly talks about there aren't big changes. You'll see there are changes coming up in the fall of 25 to services. And we're still planning for future changes. We have a team that meets weekly and then internal sub-teams that meet and have been for the last, well, I've been here 3.5 years, and that's been an ongoing process as we move toward waiver redesign and reset. So it's what we learned during those listening sessions across the state, several years ago, but what we continue to hear through the Building Bridges sessions, through what we're learning through our innovation pilot projects. Those are demonstration projects that are still in play. What we hear directly, what we hear from this group, from the 1102 task force, shameless plug, that's next week. That task force is sunsetting at the end of the year, and some of that work will be moving toward us. But we have continued in those efforts, and there is a plan and a timeline. And as Holly said, we're really focused on waiver reset. And what we have heard loudly and clearly is a new array of waivers that better support. So we can't just continue to tweak CIH and FSW. We just end up in the same place. And it maybe looks a little bit differently because we did an oil change or something of that sort of, so we are moving toward how do we reset with this new holistic array, to your point, how do we support the needs of the individual? And that's the goal. So know that we are listening and we are working and we are moving toward that, and there is a plan, and we will be sharing more of that here and publicly as we move forward over the next, months and years. But it's not a long timeline that we have to accomplish this objective. So know that it is foremost in our minds. And, Derek, before I pass the baton, I will add, we hear you, and I hear everyone in this room. And I will revisit next month our division priorities. We have 3, and one of those is to build provider capacity. And by that, we don't just mean the number, we mean the skill set. So when we're looking at pieces, it's the whole. And so that's why I put forth those questions. If I have 10 entities, but they each only have 1 team member, do I have enough providers? We have to start having some conversations. And if I have 10 providers, but they can only support people with this level of need, do I really have capacity? We have to start having those conversations. We hear it and we see these things bubble up. And she won't toot her horn, and she won't, but every day, each and every one of us get an email, a one-off, and we get engaged in these situations and we learn from those situations. Those are case studies. It's like, wow, look what happened here. Do we have a system issue? We log all of that. It's not always as easy as for us to share it all, and in a beautifully empirical way. But know that there's more to come. And our IPPs, our innovation pilot projects that were funded with those ARPA funds or COVID dollars or enhanced FMAP, however one wants to refer that, we are gathering some very strong data that will inform us in designing the future. So, and a lot of folks and many others have been players in those projects. So I know it was a hearty discussion today, but I'm done.
Can I just react? Can I react?
I appreciate it. I just did want to clarify because I did recently, and I want to thank our partners for elevating. It did recently get elevated to me that there was, and perhaps I did not communicate clearly, that we had set aside waiver redesign. That is not the case, and I cannot stress that more.
Can I react to that as the person who's on the receiving end of all of this?
Yeah.
I do think that for a lot of families, we have been looking towards that waiver redesign with hope.
Yes.
For there are a lot of people in my families, and everybody's different. I know there's a million different situations, but I know a lot of people where, you know, I'm on the family service, my daughter is on the family services waiver. She gets 2 days of day program for her whole family services waiver. And that's until I'm 80. You know, and so that's where the redesign has been a glimmer of hope for more help and support. And so when it's just, oh, it's coming, it's coming, it's coming, and then it's, you know, I've been tuning into these meetings since 2019 on my computer, waiting to hear what my hope is for the future. So.
And we hear you, and we do have a sense of urgency. And Kim, I'm looking at you because, you know, you and I are at the table together, right? Talking about these things. And, you know, I've been in the system a long time, not on this side. I was on the other side of things for a long time. And I know for your situation, it's like you're waiting for that day. And yet I do see, and I hope that everyone sees, that we have made such great progress. It wasn't that long ago when the majority of people just sat and waited for decades for services, period. And I think you know, Derek, you've made points and others have made a point. The better that we engage and the better that we get out there, then the more aware we are of the need. And so then that directs, but we are very intentional. We are moving forward with it. We're actually likely going to publish something soon.
Hopefully by the end of the year, a path forward document.
Yeah, with a better update, if you will. Anyway, sorry, Jessica, but I felt like
I watched it. Okay, so we'll continue with mine. I'm not supporting. Cars are stalled. I don't know. I don't have my plug, okay,
Kyle.
Go ahead, you're gonna share.
I will endeavor to leave Jessica some time. As a reminder, Indiana sent a team of VR and BEAD staff to Alexandria last week for the annual meeting of the State Employment Leadership Network, which is really been a huge benefit to us in terms of technical assistance and resources from some national experts that are part of that network. I wanted to share just a few things that came out of that meeting related to kind of our alignment efforts across the division. The first is that serendipitously, this year's annual meeting was highly focused on how you can increase competitive integrated employments by enhancing the cooperation and coordination of VR and waiver service systems. Every state looks different. In some instances, there's very little cooperation between those two systems. They're in separate divisions or agencies within the state government apparatus. But I think even though we're kind of located within the same agency, you know, there was a lot to bring out of that meeting that we heard from other states. Part of the magic of that meeting is just listening to what other states are doing, the strategies they've tried, what's working well, and we've taken some ideas away. The first was really, you know, that we can do a better job as the state of articulating a vision for not just sequencing services between the two programs, but braiding and really allowing for parallel simultaneous engagement with those two systems. And so there's a lot of work that we need to do in terms of internally clarifying what that looks like, and then sharing that with our public stakeholders. The first effort along that is that we will actually be meeting this Friday with our SELN state national support team to work through the beginnings of some process mapping around what what's occurring now to be able to identify what we want that to look like in a future iteration. So more to come on that process mapping. I hope that at some point when we've got it kind of pulled together in a way we can share that with the advisory group. The second piece of that is a little bit related, but there was also an undercurrent around engaging with and kind of our evaluating the role of day habilitation or day services within the larger kind of strategy. I think we've articulated, you heard Kelly, I've heard Kelly certainly say this before, you know, the employment transformation piece, certainly we want folks to have access and success at competitive integrated employment as part of the supports that we provide. But that is not the sole driver of what we're trying to do as a division. And so as we continue to see providers close their sheltered workshop settings and we watch individuals begin to increase their utilization of day habilitation services, I think it's really important for us to start to pick at what that looks like day to day and you know on the ground in terms of someone's ability to actually access community experiences. So there was a kind of an undercurrent around what the SELN calls community life engagement. Really, those are like basically non-work kinds of experiences like volunteering or post-secondary education, things like that, that get someone out into the community in ways that they might not have previously had the option or the opportunity to do. And so I think, you know, as we continue to kind of think through this employment transformation, we need to really understand not just the role that employment has in people's lives, but the role that that community integration has in folks' lives, and start to think, you know, from that person-centered perspective, how we weave those two kind of sides of the waiver and house together. So that was another thing that kind of came out of that. And just quickly, the final thing I want to do, and this will hopefully come as a pleasant surprise, but I wanted to give a shout out to John Van Wicklen and Becky Minglen and Megan Johnston from the Beats team, who have really worked over the last couple of years to get a resource that SELN gives us every year as part of our membership out into the hands of our case management companies. And so we were actually, the state was recognized at our meeting for having the highest utilization of that e-learning case management resource and the highest completion rate among member states. So kudos to that team for helping to drive that. I think that we're just barely scratching the surface of how we can continue to use that resource and kind of embed that within the case management, care management expectations and training. But I just wanted to give a shout out to that team for working really hard to get that into the hands of case management companies. I know that's a voluntary kind of resource. We didn't mandate that, but the case management companies really rose to the occasion and have done a great job of accessing that, and not just accessing it, but having staff complete that. So kudos, not just to the Beats team, but also to our case management companies for driving that as well. All right, Jessica, I'll pause there. I'm sure I'll have more for November, but.
Okay, couple things, and this will touch a little bit, Kim, on some of the things that you were talking about. So I'm going to talk about some of the IPPs quickly, but one of we have 3 IPPs around social skills. So peer supports, and looking at what that could look like as a potential service, standalone, or as part of another service or redesign of a certain service. So ARC of Evansville, they are looking at social skills specifically for teens, 10 or lower, not quite teens, but 10 to 17-year-olds. And so they have been, they're utilizing, and I'm going to say this full, it's the Peers curriculum, which is based out of UCLA. It's a specific platform that was created there. And so they're using that curriculum, training certain members of their staff What's interesting and what we're finding with peers, there's nothing necessarily wrong with peers, but peers is somewhat outdated. And when it comes to, teens, it has some, teens communicate a lot differently, right, than I'm teaching myself, but then we do, right? So a lot of, they're finding that some of the curriculum, specifically, especially for teens, is somewhat outdated, but it's really looking at building the social skills, and it's happening really in an environment, it's not contrived. In the sense that it's not like taking someone out, hey, let's go to McDonald's, and not a social situation, right? It's like actually with your peers. And in talking about, and again, it's kind of funny to hear their experience versus one of the others that's working with adults, just some of the things that they navigate with teens versus adults in some situations. So some interesting information that's coming out as we look at these programs and how this can potentially inform us moving forward with some sort of peer support service within our waivers. So it's an exciting one. The second one is Abby Key, and what they are looking at is specifically around what behavioral supports, not necessarily what behavioral supports could be, but more how we look at training for caregivers and or supports of individuals with disabilities. As you know, unfortunately, a lot of times when someone is receiving behavioral supports, it's in that certain setting, and then the behavior leaves, right? Well, what kind of support what are we talking about with their families and the people they live with? Because, behaviors, which I don't love that term, but they're not happening. It's not always like they're happening in part of the behaviorist, right? And so how are we supporting the caregivers, or the folks who live with, people or even their friends and et cetera around what behavioral supports should be and how they can continue to support their loved one, their friend, when the behaviorist isn't necessarily there. So they're doing some work around that. And last but not least, we have Wabash Center. They are partnering with men, I wanna make sure I say this right, Mental Health America Wabash Valley region, is that right? The affiliate down in Wabash, near Wabash, and they are developing a DSE mental health toolkit. And so they are working with some of the staff within Wabash and really focusing on the mental health of DSPs. And how addressing, those concerns and those, and navigating that space impacts the services that they provide individuals. So it's really cool, they have that partner there, which is huge. And this is going to not necessarily impact like a waiver service, but it's really gonna be impactful for the work Kelly and I are doing with DSP training. And so obviously it's volunteer, but they have quite a few staff who wanted to volunteer, take advantage of some of the resources and things that they have provided their staff. So pretty cool stuff coming out there.
I think that one's really exciting.
Yeah, it is.
And we just talk about capacity being more than just volume. It really is about the skill set and capacity of those that are providing it. So it's training, but it's also how do we
Support on the job.
support the direct service worker, the direct support professional is often and spends as much time in an individual's lives as families and others. So these are significant.
Yeah.
Roles.
And some people have those things in part of their job already and some don't, so yeah, it's exciting, so it's. Okay, so we can have, I watch instead.
Look at you,
you're
excited.
So I like it. Just real quick, a couple just before we jump in, or continue, virtual in November. No meeting December, and then January and February are also virtual. Let me know if I have to send the invites individually because we don't meet. If I send out a big thing, it doesn't work because we don't always meet. So let me know if you're not getting those meetings. I think I need to ask Matt, so you got them. So you should have a meeting on your calendar through September. I know, but it's don't do it, and it's.
No, you can cancel it.
Yeah. But anyway, you should have most of the meetings for next year. But let me know if not, I will make sure you get those, and I'll send out an additional, I'll send out the schedule again and everything, for folks, just so they have it. So, okay.
I want to do the first part one.
No, you're on, I don't know, you're in trouble or something.
Oh, yeah.
No, I'm just kidding, go.
I probably be in trouble after this, but I just wanted to say that I'm sorry for saying this, but I've got to say it because it's on my mind and I have to say it. So here it goes. It makes me sick when I see on the news that someone has died waiting for a waiver. That makes me sick, and we are here to make sure that that kind of stuff doesn't happen. And I hope we can fix this problem before it happens again, because she needed a waiver to help her get the services that she needed. And she died waiting for the waiver.
Sean, can you send me that link to that news story? Because I didn't see
Yeah.
that.
It was on the news yesterday and it was on the news this morning, and I think it's sad that people are waiting like that.
I have two. I'm sorry, I don't want to follow that, but I have really unemotional questions for the parking lot. Number one, and this is just me reflecting on what have we done in the past that worked really well that we might have fallen off. And back when, this is a long time ago. So I know Kim Dotson was there. Back when I believe Mitch Daniels was governor. Thanks for that. Well, there's not, Kathy Robinson was there too. We, long time ago, used to have quarterly financial reviews that were very transparent about where we were, how it aligned with the DDRS goals. And it was just great for people to understand how things were flowing. And I'm just making a suggestion that we may consider that again. It was an FSSA, I believe it wasn't just DDRS. But as we go through lots of different changes.
Like what do you mean?
No, it was
The quarterly financial.
quarterly financial review, but it was open to stakeholders. So we all understood it was, we're transparent. So that was just a suggestion. And the question I have, which goes to our charge to try and support you guys in how do we do this better in the future? Is my question is, if there were to be changes to the provider agreement to solidify some of the expectations that we all have behaviorally and being a provider of service as an entity, is that a document that is, where's the control over that? Because we've had there's a lot of elephants in the room, but there have been questions about why can't we address that in the provider agreement? And I don't know the answer of how, the technicalities of how that can change.
I'm just gonna briefly say, and it's probably a future discussion, but there are a lot of matters there. One is that we would have to have authority either statutorily or code over certain matters. There are also just some issues with compliance with CMS requirements. So we can't just, it's not as easy as changing the provider agreement. It's not all necessarily under our discretion.
Could you do
And
a
I'm
code
not
that's,
saying that to pass the buck, it's just, I'm acknowledging the realities of the situation.
Because I would encourage the division to remember, and I know you know this, that building capacity towards better quality outcomes also involves being able to hold accountable the people who are not doing
Yes,
it well.
and we are looking at those particular matters.
Could you-
It's
I'm out.
not strong.
My last meeting.
Yeah, it's not strong.
Next month.
You know, I'm the last in person when I just wanted to.
could you do a code of conduct?
I mean.
We have a code of conduct.
Do you have a code of conduct?
I mean, stuff would be really.
It has to be in code.
Even if it were a BDDS policy? I mean, it would have to be in code to tell somebody they're out of line.
The policy has to be founded in. Actually, yeah, so.
We
Well,
do better.
Yeah. So.
Then it seems like if our hands are tied to some degree, then we should be giving people the opportunity and empower them to have some more control over their own services, like person-centered, person-directed services. We should be thinking of other options if we have a provider network unwilling to meet the needs of people.
An expansion of self-direction across all waivers.
And we're talking about that
As
next week.
planned, and we're actually engaging weekly with the group. Heather Dane is leading that project. So that is full
Steam ahead.
steam ahead.
Okay, real quick, Kate, go ahead.
it's probably not gonna be quick, sorry. So I just going through this process and hearing, I really appreciate all of the information and data that we get every single month. I also need to say that I feel like it's difficult to provide feedback when we don't have enough time to do that and develop advisory products during the meeting. I don't know if there's a way to incorporate that into the agenda, because you're giving us a lot of good information, but as an advisory council, it's difficult to actually advise when the agenda is full. And I think we saw that kind of demonstrated here today with the provider discussion. The other thing I wanted to ask, and it can be tabled, when with the IPP grants, those I'm understanding those to be potential or new services that could go into future waiver designs. Is that correct? So when you do those and those are incorporated into waiver applications with CMS, they have to go through that whole approval process. Okay, that's what I thought. I just needed that confirmation.
Yeah, if we were to move forward, then it'd be public.
Right, all of that and all of that whole process. I guess my concern goes back to how we discussed the funding of those services, when some of the issues in the last year have kind of come up and how we move forward.
Yeah, all that, it's gonna, that stuff, all that the CMS did was said, here's this money. They didn't say you can fast track these. I mean, it all goes, Molly and I are working on, we're like looking at the timeline, figuring out it's money. Some of these are gonna cost money, then there has to be potentially a rate study. I mean, yeah, there's
Exactly, the rate study and how that gets incorporated into the waiver system and then the advocacy of the legislative. I understand all of those
It goes
levels.
through the
I just
same
think that
process.
we need to make sure that folks know when these IPP projects are out there, our community members who are participating in them, that they understand.
We have very good, yes, trust me.
I mean, I get from a personal, I get the information from Hands and Autism, and it took me until today to figure out that, oh, if I actually fill out all of these forms, then I'm contributing to a potential new service, from that family perspective, because that wasn't really clear in communications that from a family perspective I received. But I also go 100 miles an hour a day because of all the things that I do. So trying to keep up with everything is a lot.
But honestly, not all IPP grants will wind up being services.
Yes. No, they will not. They are
very much a.
They're hot
demonstration. Yeah, they're not all services, they were resources, so.
But we also may find that the research or the data indicates it's that we're not gonna move forward with it for whatever the reason.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So it might not be effective.
One thing I would suggest, Kate, and I don't wanna hold this, I think that maybe this is a conversation for the next meeting. Cause I think your point is valid, I think because we only have 2 hours, I think the issue is that balance between getting you talking about things, because sometimes this is common stuff we have to do on the side, right?
Oh, I understand.
And so I'd love people's feedback of what that looks like, because I agree, I think there's 2 hours and it's once a month and it's a lot and people wanna hear what's going on, but we also try to figure out how you have conversation. So if people have ideas too, on how we can structure it, I don't take any ownership, I mean, if I'm happy to change things, so.
I think having a conversation about the expectations too, like what is it that we want to take away?
Yeah. I think one of the things though that I would note, and would be part of that discussion, you referenced today, actually that was a discussion that wasn't put forth, it elevated, so I think, and you kept saying it, we likely need to say, hey, we're gathering feedback on X today, presenting, let's put that in the parking lot, we'll place it on the agenda for next month. So I'm trying to listen to a lot of this and watch. We've also, in the past, we've expanded times, we've had special work sessions or work groups, those are all options that we might.
And we try different things, I mean, sometimes we create subgroups and then. Right, either people on time, it's that balance of like
familiar with.
It's like we create on time and so it's that balance, but I'm open to whatever people think is. Yeah, one more, you might be our last.
Okay, I'll wrap it up here quick. One suggestion, I would prefer to have the data ahead of time. I can read the data and I can come here with questions, and I think that probably feeds in a little bit to the point that maybe we have a little more time to discuss.
We give
things.
it 2 days.
Yes. So if we got it a little bit ahead of time, which I know is hard to. pull out of
We're.
I know.
Telling Karen, we were putting those
I know.
lines, it's hard, but
Yeah.
yeah, we're trying.
Yeah, so I think if we had it maybe a week in advance, we would come with questions a little bit more.
Likely to get it out early, it's going to be older data.
Yeah.
And
But
that's.
maybe that's better.
If
Yeah.
we are comfortable with that, I think that's just a recognition. Because I talk about capacity, I have to be aware of the capacity that we have internally. So we've always tried to present most current. So we may be a month back or 2
Well,
months
or,
back.
I mean, I think this group is continued to meet monthly, and that is not what is required.
Right, it's
and
quarterly
it-
in the beads data.
So, I mean, I think it may just be worth a revisiting of like, what do you want to discuss in the time that we have, and do we need to meet every month, or should we extend the time and not meet every single month? Because that is, I think, the capacity issue for beads is compiling the data on a regular basis, and the frequency that we are, at least sometimes creates.
I think what this group wants, I will stress, the data for beads really only is required to be presented quarterly.
Yeah, correct.
This group has indicated, and I've gotten emails following me, they want it every month. Well, that causes a capacity issue on our end, and we're not going to be able to get it out as quickly. We're okay if you want it monthly, but I think we just have to discuss what the limitations are to that. If we go quarterly, and I don't even mean on meetings, it's on data. But
What if we took one of the quarterly meetings and used that to develop advisory products? So we get data in all the other months, and then one of those months is, now that we have this information, let's go ahead and come up with some sort of response, some products that say a recommendation to improve whatever. That way we're structuring some time. If there's any new data that comes up, we get it electronically.
I wonder if, Kelly and I talked about this in so I understand people need to leave. We talked about doing this once, we wanted to wait until new members were all here in January. We talked about doing a trajectory or doing some kind of reset, Holly, reset. Redesign. But like, what is the mission of this group, right? Like statutorily, we have, okay.
And really, like, how do we?
But like, back to your point of like, what just, and there are gonna be new folks. The problem is, we can do it in November, it's just not, we're not gonna have everyone here. So we can wait till January, which is fine. I mean, maybe that it's virtual. I don't love doing that virtually. But I don't know. So I think that's another thought, kind of and it being an outsider, I mean, I'm not a great person to lead a trajectory all the time. I'm not always the best facilitator, but if we can have an outsider, someone like who can kind of walk us through, and I think look at goals for this group. That's not just in statute. I mean, we can go back to the statute and that's great, but it's, so that's something.
Can we just reserve some of the November meeting to talk about how to move forward in 2025? So that we can have an open discussion virtually, but make no decisions? Yeah.
No, do everything.
Well, why don't you just plan?
All right.
Hour of information or an hour of discussion.
Okay.
In November.
But a guided, I mean, it needs to be guided.
I know, that's why I need to.
Can I get my second comment in just real quick? I'm sorry, two things. As we talk about employment and how it functions within the waiver system, I do think that we also need to look at our folks who are in our SGLs. Folks in group homes have a very different issue with employment that we've kind of failed to really look at and address. So I know we're talking about it as it relates to waiver services, but I don't think we can leave that population out of the discussion. Thank you.
And we talked about doing maybe an update on the modernization, probably at some point. Okay, all right, I will get this all out, the notes, and take a note for me. I'll get you an updated stuff. Whatever we. All right, thanks.
Thank you.
Always
on the phone.
I know. You're shocking.